boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Errol Spence versus Tszyu, set for Australia on July 25th at a location to be determined. 3 years removed from the loss to Terence Crawford, Errol Spence, 28-1 with 22 knockouts, will wade into enemy territory when facing former junior middleweight champion Tszyu on July 26th in Australia, July 25th in the United States. Veteran boxing journalist Dan Raphael first reported the news, which has since been echoed by Boxing Scene and reputable Australian news outlets. Given PBC's involvement in Tszyu's points win over Dennis Nerja on April 5th, they anticipate this event will be a prime video pay-per-view stateside, with a friendly US start time to maximize their live audiences worldwide. Immediately post-fight, the Australian contender was asked by Main Event's Ben Damon whether he believed he was ready for that step up in class after decision wins over unbeaten but also unheralded opposition. "I feel like I'm up for it. This Nerja guy was tough, no excuses, but me and Errol Spence is gonna be one hell of a fight. You know how I am. I don't take a backward step, so if he wants to meet me at the front, bring it on. Catch the big fish, let's go fishing," he said in response, while Spence wasn't impressed when reacting on social media. There's only one reason that Errol Spence, who's supposed to be the bigger name of the two, would be the one traveling to Australia. It's because Errol Spence Jr.'s star is dimmed. Since the loss to Terence Crawford and the 3 years that he spent missing in action, he doesn't have the drawing power that he used to. Worsening the situation is that piracy is at an all-time high, and selling a pay-per-view in the United States has become increasingly difficult. It has also since come out that Tszyu had already decided, a few weeks out before the Nerja win, that more changes were afoot after being left unsettled in a Miami training camp under Pedro Diaz, 9,000 miles away, and with a 14-hour time difference between home comforts. He will now be trained and managed by Jeff Fenech, just 6 months after parting ways from his longtime team, headed by Igor Golubev and manager Glenn Jennings. This combination, Tszyu and Fenech, is not just going to be remembered in boxing history, but in sporting history, he told Fox Sports Australia. "It's been a long time in the making, and I wanted a big Australian synergy, something that has never happened. The fight with Spence will be one of the greatest victories in Australian boxing history. There was a lot happening in that last camp, and in all honesty, I wanted to spend more time in Australia. Nobody was doing anything bad, but before that fight, I had that in mind, that I can't do any more time away." And so the next time we see Tim in action in late July, Jeff Fenech will be making his debut in Tim's corner, as Ronnie Shields is set to make his debut in Spence's corner. Spence's longtime coaching partnership with Derek James ended acrimoniously back in 2024, some 15 years after it began. The 36-year-old went from budding amateur star, winning national titles, and later becoming an Olympian, to winning the IBF world title against Kell Brock in Sheffield, England, 5 years into his pro career, all with Derek James in his corner. He won 7 consecutive world championship fights over a near 5-year period, later unifying the WBC and WBA titles before the damaging Crawford defeat for the Ring magazine and undisputed supremacy at welter. Now, he's said to be training intensively with Ronnie Shields alongside former WBO champion Brian Norman. While this is a more lucrative bout in Australia, Spence knows the value of an impressive win, the value it would provide. He was previously in negotiations to face WBC title holder Sebastian Fundora, and while the 28-year-old belt holder has stated a willingness to face all comers, he'd like Spence on his resume, just as Tszyu does. The July 25th winner will have increased leverage on a healthy timeline to stay active with Zayas versus Ennis on June 27th and IBF champion Josh Kelly expected to make his first defense of his title in July or August. So there's going to be a lot happening in the junior middleweight division around that time. Everybody's keeping active. It's hard to give Errol Spence a chance in that fight, so far away from home, having been out for so long. Even if he did compete at a higher level than Tszyu for a longer duration of time, that was a long time ago, and at a lower weight. That was at welter. This is junior middle. Corner situation I don't like also. Debuting with Ronnie Shields when I've never seen a fighter go to Ronnie Shields and improve. I've never seen a fighter go to Ronnie and start looking better. Not crazy about Tim Tszyu's corner situation either, all of a sudden swapping out Pedro Diaz for Jeff Fennick when he was actually starting to look good under Pedro Diaz, and that style they were working on, it was coming along, which I think would have been beneficial in a Spence fight. To now be experimenting with a new trainer and a new approach, I don't like it. But I like the 3 years that Errol Spence Jr. has been out even less. I mean, I don't know if he's confident or stupid. Going all the way to Australia, being the away fighter against Tim Tszyu, who's not perfect, but he has at least been fighting, which is more than we can say for Errol. Tim's coming off of 2 back-to-back wins over 2 unbeaten fighters. Errol hasn't fought in 3 years, and he's still coming off the loss to Terrence. On one end, you say that in the time he's been out, that gave him ample time to recover, but on the other end, ring rust is a real thing, and that time you're out, you lose your timing, you lose your reflexes, and sometimes you don't get them back. Spence is in his mid-30s. People don't tend to get faster as they get older. Something's definitely working against him, and that's what makes it such an intriguing matchup. Even if you don't think of Tim Tszyu as ever having been as good as Errol Spence Jr. has been, Errol hasn't been good in a very long time. He hasn't been active. It matters a great deal. The inactivity, the corner switch, being the away fighter, somewhat foolhardy. And even if Errol Spence Jr. by some chance were to win this fight, how would he fare against the other junior middleweights that are out there, like Boots? Because if he wins, you know that's going to become a conversation. Errol versus Boots, or Errol versus Xander Zayas, Errol versus Sebastian Fundora, Jermell Charlo.
To Fundora first. We'll go to Fundora route because we've been in talks with the Fundora, and we working on something right now with that. And I'm working on it with PBC them. And then as well as we've been in talks with the winner of Tim Tszyu and Errol Spence. And they both verbally, all of them 3 guys have agreed to fight me. So now behind, doors, they working.
Jermell Charlo would find himself in a similar situation to Errol Spence Jr. if he were to face Sebastian Fundora, who has been fighting and has been winning, while Jermell Charlo is still coming off a loss, the same as Errol. Still coming off a lengthy stint of inactivity, the same as Errol. Because Jermell Charlo hasn't fought as a junior middleweight since May of 2022 in what was the Brian Castaño rematch for Undisputed. It's been that long since he fought at 154, about 4 years. It's been 3 since he fought anybody. In September of 2023 when he loses a lopsided decision to Canelo Alvarez at super middle. And now he basically wants to jump off the couch and in the ring with Sebastian Fundora, who has been fighting and has been winning and has been improving. I will say that maybe Jermell can give him a run for his money. A better fight than Keith Thurman just did, because Keith didn't put up a fight at all. He was just surviving, running for his life. Jermell, who's noticeably taller, noticeably longer, punches harder than Keith, at least. Because the discrepancy in size between Jermell and Sebastian is not as dramatic as it was with Keith Thurman, you could give him a fighting chance, but there are still things working against him. His age, the inactivity, and perhaps being in a weakened state, campaigning at 154, which he hasn't made in 4 years, and I don't imagine, now in his mid-30s, it's become easier to make. So why would he do this? Same reason that Spence is fighting Tim. Money. You notice that the fighters never want to go backwards on the money. What the doctor ordered would be a safe fight, a tune-up fight, to get your juices going again and get back in a rhythm. But because these guys don't want to go backwards on the money, they won't take a tune-up first. Yeah, Jermell Charlo could have went to Pro Box for a tune-up fighter, inked a deal with Matchroom for a tune-up fight, and why couldn't the PBC get him a tune-up fight? If he didn't want to change his decorum and he wanted to stay put, okay, you can do that, but why didn't they get you a tune-up fight in the interim? Or is it that you didn't want one? Because in taking a tune-up fight, you're not going to get multi-millions for that. You may not get multi-millions for Sebastian. Further indication that there are far too many fighters fighting behind a paywall is Sebastian Fundora, who I think is one of the most entertaining fighters around, especially at junior middle, but his fights are now behind a paywall where they should not be, because he's never had the following
to warrant him being on pay-per-view. He's a fun fighter to watch.
Seldom ever in a boring fight.
But he's not box office, and 3 years removed from the sport, neither is Jermell Charlo. What's his marquee value like in 2026? If they do that fight between those two fighters in-house, you can bet your bottom dollar it's gonna be a pay-per-view. Though who's gonna buy it?
Not a lot of people, I imagine. Should Jermell Charlo pull off a victory after being gone for so long, resume the throne as at least one of the champions at this weight, that really would be a good win and a strong statement. Because Sebastian Fundora is one of the somebodies at 154. If Jermell beats him for the green and gold title, he's back in the mix of everything. Everything.
Tell me that it wouldn't make things interesting if Jermell Charlo can successfully return to the junior middleweight division. That would spice things up.
Also talking about the potentiality of facing the winner of Tszyu versus Spence. Yet another fight that the PBC can put together in-house.
You don't think he'd have to go to Australia like Spence?
Oh, he actually might. He might. Because it's a bigger fight in Australia than it would be in the United States, but it would have also been built up. Whoever wins the Tszyu versus Spence fight.
It would have been built up.
And in the interim, other conversations are bound to start, like Jermell Charlo versus the winner of Ennis versus Zayas, or Jermell Charlo versus Josh Kelly. Theoretically, this fight could put Jermell Charlo back in the forefront of the junior middleweight division, but of course, he has to win, and having been out for so long, that doesn't give him the best chance of winning.
Sebastian is sort of cleaning up over there at the PBC, taking out a quasi-retired fighter in Keith Thurman, now another quasi-retired fighter in Jermell Charlo. It's also conceivable that Sebastian might beat him. He's younger, he's fresher, he's active, he's actually improving.
These are very intriguing fights being put together by the PBC and No Limit, because they're really the ones behind Tszyu versus Spence, but it's an intriguing sequence of fights. Tszyu versus Spence, Charlo versus Fundora. These are exciting fights to make in the junior middleweight division, some for the wrong reasons.
They're still very exciting. It is not a foregone conclusion that Tszyu beats Errol Spence, and the same is true in reverse. Just like it's not a foregone conclusion that Sebastian beats Jermell, and it's not a foregone conclusion that Jermell beats him. I really do like this sequence of fights from the PBC, which is saying a lot, because you guys know I'm very critical of their business practices, but a good fight's a good fight. And super middleweight news, you may have heard that unbeaten up-and-comer Diego Pacheco tabs Buddy McGirt as his new trainer, and I swear to God, this kid must have been watching the relay, because that's who I wanted him to go to. That's who I recommended. Now that he's no longer being trained by Jose Benavidez,
and whoever that guy was who was training him immediately after that, Buddy McGirt is the guy. Buddy McGirt, in my opinion, is the answer. Diego Pacheco's push to become a world champion renews with an alliance with a former world champion fighter as his new trainer. Boxing Scene has learned that International Boxing Hall of Fame member Buddy McGirt has been brought on as head cornerman for South Central LA's Pacheco, 25-0 with 18 KOs, a 25-year-old super middleweight ranked in the top 10 by all four sanctioning bodies.
Diego had been looking a bit more human, a bit more vulnerable as of late in his last three starts. The fight with the then unbeaten Steven So Old Nelson.
So old.
Then the Trevor McCumbee fight after that, where Diego looked less than spectacular. And after that, with a then unbeaten Kevin Lele Saggio.
Kevin dropped him. Kevin Lele Saggio gave a young Diego Pacheco all he could handle, but Diego was still able to win a points decision, albeit by the skin of his teeth, and that's what likely inspired him to make some changes to the corner. He's gone about as far as he can go with Jose Benavidez Sr.
And whoever that guy was after that.
So now he's with Buddy McGirt, who's previously trained recently unified middleweight champion Yanni Bekalam-Kanalai, former light heavyweight champion Sergey Kovalev, and before that, Arturo Gatti and Paulie Malignaggi.
I really like Buddy as a trainer.
It would seem that the running theme for this episode of The Relay is breaking in new trainers, hiring new trainers to take their careers to new heights, new levels. That's what Diego Pacheco is doing, except
where Diego Pacheco is different from Tim Tszyu and Errol Spence is he's an unbeaten fighter. He's fresh, he's young, and he's really still just getting started.
Pacheco earlier this year signed with Sheer Sports after parting ways with trainer Jose Benavidez Sr., coming off a lackluster win in December over Kevin Lele Sajo, in which Pacheco was knocked down in the 8th round. The 6'4" Pacheco remains tied to Eddie Hearns' Matchroom Boxing, ranked number 2 by the World Boxing Council under Christian Mobili, interim champion Lester Martinez, and number 1 ranked former undisputed champion Canelo Alvarez. Pacheco is number 6 via the IBF to new champion Ozlisi Iglesias, number 5 with the WBO, where Hamza Shiraz will fight for the belt next month, and number 8 via the WBA.
WBA champion is Armando Resendiz, who defends the title in May 2nd versus former junior middleweight champion Jaime Munguia on the undercard of Benavidez versus Zurdo. Pacheco is in line to fight again this summer.
May have forgotten that Diego Pacheco, before we got to this point, was actually supposed to be fighting Hamza Shiraz, what would have been for the brown belt, but he turned the fight down. With good reason. He faced a bit of backlash over it, but in the long run, it may pay off, because to me,
Buddy McGirt is the guy. Buddy McGirt is the answer. That's who I wanted Diego Pacheco to go to. I'm confident that Buddy McGirt, more than some other trainers, can whip Diego Pacheco into shape like he did with Yanibek Alimkhanuly.
the best version of Yanibek I've ever seen had Buddy McGirt in his corner. He hasn't looked as dominant or dangerous now that he's with Brian Viloria.
He looked a much better fighter with Buddy McGirt in his corner, and
After Sergey Kovalev lost the WBO title to a then unbeaten later Alvarez, it was Buddy McGirt who rehabilitated Kovalev, and it was Buddy McGirt who helped him get the title back. It was Buddy McGirt who also rehabilitated Callum Smith.
after he loses his WBA title to Canelo Alvarez at 168, moves up to 175, leaves Joe Gallagher, goes to Buddy McGirt, becomes a top contender, and one of the more dangerous guys around, with Buddy in his corner. I trust Buddy to do for Diego Pacheco what he did for Callum Smith. You will notice that they have very similar physical dimensions, a Diego Pacheco and a Callum Smith.
They're both very statuesque fighters, very tall fighters, very long fighters, hard punchers if they can get the punches off. What Diego needs to do is a better job of managing the distance, using his height and using his length, his lead, to control the distance at which the fight is being fought, and not getting flustered if an opponent crashes the pocket.
Show more of a work rate.
Sometimes it feels like Diego's not doing enough, and in those quiet moments where not a lot is happening, that's the opportunity for the opponent to get close. But if you're using your lead and being judicious with it, prolific with it, it stops a lot of stuff from happening before it starts.
Sets up other punches.
So I was very close to selling all my Diego Pacheco stock because I happen to think the kid's a good fighter and he's got some good tools, but he's been looking human as of late. And I think Buddy McGirt, more than some other trainers, can whip him into shape and get him back to looking like a world beater, a world-class contender, and perhaps one day, a world champion. Buddy is the answer. And I swear to God, either Diego Pacheco watches the relay and he heard me say this, make this recommendation, or great minds just think alike. Because the whole time, this is who I wanted him to go to.
I expect to see good things from young Diego